Good afternoon. How was lunch? Good? Yeah? So I know that for many of you who are based in the Bay Area, outside it's super, super hot. But for everybody else who's traveling in, it actually feels pretty nice. So definitely not a typical day for us in San Francisco. So welcome. I'm super excited to be here. We all know that AI tools are streamlining, giving us superpowers on our individual work. However, we haven't seen that translate into how teams operate and how we actually commercialize products. So my name is Austin. I lead product teams at Cisco, where I look after the software platform for Cisco's networking business. Prior to Cisco, I led product teams at Microsoft, Twitter, and a few exited startups as well. And a big part of my role today is how we actually transform an enterprise organization of more than 1,500 engineers, UX designers, UX researchers, and product managers to adopt agentic development in this new world. So I want to talk about some real-world examples of what's working, what's not, and what we've learned. So I was listening to an interview a few weeks ago by Simon Willison. And he mentioned that you'd come up with a spec, you'd hand it over to engineering, and after a few weeks, they might come back with an implementation. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And if you're lucky, this is something that would happen every on the quarter order of weeks or months. Now this whole process takes less than 3 hours. Now what? So Simon Willison is a prolific engineer. He has contributed to a number of open source projects, including the Django framework for Python. And he's really been pushing the boundaries of agentic development. So he actually made terms like prompt injection and AI slop popular. And really, as a product leader at Cisco, a big part of my role is actually how do we orchestrate dozens of teams to deliver a single roadmap that moves the business forwards and really delivers on our business outcomes, but also builds great products for our customers. Now, with AI, it's real that this is actually much more complex. There's more teams, there's more prototypes, there's more 6-page strategy documents. I'm sure you all feel this now. And actually aligning teams is becoming much harder, where you have teams that are running in different directions, trying to move quickly. And actually decisions are coming at us much faster now. So how do we actually build an operating model that leverages all of our individual strengths, but also doesn't sacrifice quality for speed? So first, let's talk about us. Let's talk about us humans in the room. What's going to happen to us as UX designers, as researchers, as product managers, as engineers, as technical leaders in the world of AI? So first, I'd love to get a sense of who's in the audience, who am I talking to. So if you're an engineer in the room, a technical leader, raise your hand. Okay. Folks that are product managers by role. Okay. A lot of folks. Okay. Folks that are UXers, UX designers, UX researchers. Okay. And how many of you don't fit cleanly into one of these roles today? You're kind of a technical leader, change management, professional services. Okay. Awesome. So we all know the story, right? The roles are converging. The lines are blurring. There's engineers that are building designs. There's designers that are building requirements. There's product managers that are checking in code. And we know that the product design cycle is actually no longer linear, right? So before we used to plan, then design, then build. Now all of this is happening at the same time. And all of this change is making everybody nervous a little bit. And it's not just the product managers checking in code. That makes me nervous, but the whole thing. So how are our roles going to shift from doing the work to orchestrating the output? So I do think every single one of these roles is going to change. But I'd love to pull the room here to see, do we feel like this is all going to converge into a single role as kind of a super builder? Anybody? Maybe? No? So how many of you think that we still need our specializations in the future where we need to kind of lean into our strengths? All right. It's pretty uniform. So I believe the same thing, right? So all of our roles are going to change more into evaluating the output, into understanding what is good and what is ready to ship. And more our roles today are going to sharpen, not go away. So from a product management perspective, a huge part of my role now is thinking about how do you actually curate the context? And the context here is around our customer understanding, our strategy, our requirements, and why we do things the way, why we focus in certain areas that we want to focus on, why we don't for the ones that we don't. And really this ownership around who decides the why, who decides what we do and what we don't do has to go down to a single person and not to an AI system. And so that accountability is still very real in this future world. On the design side, I see this role evolving to be much more of a context, experience curator. So this is someone that is looking across all the design work that's happening across the organization, right? You might have designs coming from engineers, from PMs, from other parts of the organization, and really deeply understanding the personas, the problems. Is this actually something that we can ship as an experience, or is it something that has to go back to the drawing board? And for the UX researchers, really, do we actually deeply understand this problem enough to actually ship this thing, or do we have to go back and do more primary research? Right, so that judgment is going to come from us humans in the room. And on the engineering side, I see this role evolving very rapidly into what I think about is trust. Becomes much more of a core focus for the role. So making sure that the systems that we build are scalable and secure. And when you think about construction, you have the role of a structural engineer. Right? So structural engineers, they don't lay the bricks. They decide, what does the foundation of the building need? Is it something that needs poured concrete, or is it something that needs lightweight wood framing that you need to move the walls around very quickly? And so this judgment around, is it something that we need to prototype and learn very quickly, or is it something that needs to scale to more than 1 million users, is that judgment call that engineers need to be able to make, and really ensuring that you're designing a system that scales for users and is something that they can trust. Now, at Cisco, we use a host of different AI tools now, and it's not a week goes by before somebody introduces a new one. And these are actually amazing in terms of individual productivity. Right? You can go from idea to a spec with just a few prompts. You can go from spec to design with just another few prompts. You can go from that to code very, very quickly as well. So why is it that when you apply these at the team level, the teams are not seeing the same velocity of output? So the tools have changed here, but the operating models have not. And when we think about the design kind of development process, we often use the double diamond. So many of you might be familiar with this. But the idea here is you want to separate the problem finding from the solution discovery, right? And so a big part of the double diamond is that in problem finding, you don't just pick the first problem that customers report. You actually look at the whole problem space, and you force yourself to diverge, right? Consider all the problems that we could be solving. And out of those, narrow down to the one that is the highest impact, that's the one that you want to focus on. On the solution side, same thing. Before going and building the first thing that comes to mind, you force yourself to diverge and then converge, pressure test all the solutions and then converge on the right one here. So in this model of AI, actually, what we see and what I see actually real world in my teams is that with these tools, we're actually unintentionally kind of subverting this process, right? Teams are unintentionally putting on blinders and building more features, but not necessarily solving better problems or deeper problems for our customers. And this is actually something that happens naturally, right? Like when you're prototyping, it's so nice to see like a high fidelity prototype very quickly. And it's really easy to get that to code. Even when you put it in front of customers, it tests really well, right? They love seeing these things. But at the end of the day, are they actually solving deeper problems for customers? And so this is something that I like to call the hack week problem. So how many of you all have had a hack week in your organizations where you have these small teams, cross-functional, the vibes are really good, people are prototyping for a full week, and then at the end of the hack week, you have a panel of judges, and you vote on the finalists, and you have 10 like amazing prototype concepts, but it turns out that you can't ship any single one of them, right? And like this to me is indicative of some of the things that we're seeing today, where you might actually have an amazing idea, and you test really well, but it only solves your customer base for maybe 20% of your customers. And you actually have to do a bunch of work to actually scale it for your entire customer base. Or you might have an amazing visualization, like interactive heat maps, and it's something that demos really well, it prototypes really well, customers love it, but it doesn't match any of your other design patterns for the rest of your product. So it actually is a lot of work to actually fold in and ship. So these are examples of real-world alignment challenges that we're seeing today with agentic development as teams adopt these tools more. How do we actually build that alignment in that broader ecosystem? So the opportunity here is actually we shift our thinking of how we use AI. So rather than saying we're going to go move faster and optimize for that, how do we actually think about how we broaden our horizons, right? And so in this case, on the problem side, instead of looking and analyzing user research for 1 or 2 reports, we now have the ability to go across the entire breadth of our metrics, our data, our customer insights in a single pass and be able to have a much broader view of the problem space. On the solution space, prototyping is much, much cheaper. So rather than coming up with 1 or 2 different prototypes, we could do 4, 6, 8, 12 different prototypes to understand and pressure test our ideas and be able to weigh, this is the actual best solution given this space. So the goal here is not just to focus on building features faster, but to focus on building better features. Now, there's a brainstorming framework that I love to think about here, which is called Crazy Eights. Some of you might be familiar with this. The whole thinking behind this is that most of the times our initial ideas are not good and almost always wrong, right? And so the idea behind Crazy Eights is that you force yourself to visualize your idea. So you have an idea, you actually force yourself to sketch it out. And when you sketch it out, you realize, does this idea actually hold water? Is it the thing that I thought was such a good idea? How do I actually show it for a customer? And does it actually solve the problem that I thought it would? And then once you're done with that initial sketch, you flip your piece of paper over, and you fold it into 8 little squares. And then you force yourself to actually find 8 wildly different ways to go and pressure test that concept. So 8 different variants. And you think out of the box, think about crazy ideas. And at the end of the day, you might actually throw away most of what you sketched. But the combination of all those ideas and the pressure testing of your solution really gets you to a better spot. So this is something that AI is really, really powerful at, right? So this is something that I use from writing requirements or strategy docs today. Whenever I think I have an amazing idea, this is the best idea in the world, the first thing I'll go to Claude Code is ask, what are all the ways that I could be wrong? And that's hugely powerful for me. It could be what's one huge thing that I'm missing out of this? Or sometimes I might have a really good solution. I'm like, this has to be the best way to do this. Like, I will actually go to AI and say, what are 8 different ways that we could be doing this? And give you the pros and cons and why these are not the right solutions, right? And so this really can elevate everything from requirements writing to UX synthesis to the actual prototyping and even the code itself. So something you could take back to your kind of daily workflows. Now, I want to spend a few minutes talking about a real-world case study where we're trying to apply agentic development in our teams, and we ran into some issues, right? So in this case, we made a big reorganization, as you do in a large company, and part of that was a huge strategy shift. We actually brought together 2 different teams from 2 different backgrounds. They had very different experiences, and their expertise areas were in different code bases. And the goal here was we're going to bring the teams together, and given this large new strategic initiative, you all had to work together, learn a new code base, and execute and deliver this new project for customers. And of course, with any new project, there's always some kind of impending, looming deadline. And so these 2 teams, with agentic tools, there's a lot of things that became really easy, right? So learning a new code base actually becomes dramatically easy with AI. It's not free, but it's much, much faster than it was before. Also, writing requirements, going from customer insights to requirements is something that used to take days, maybe longer to review those. That now takes hours. Writing code is much faster. But the things that the team ran into that slowed them down were not these things, right? It was really around alignment. How do you actually build a sense of shared understanding and shared context, particularly with 2 different teams that are coming together? And then as things change, as things evolve along your project, how do you stay in alignment as an organization? So these are things that really came up that actually ended up slowing down the project. Now I want to give you some examples of things that we did to overcome these. And we use a lot of tools at Cisco. We have AHA for product management. We use Jira for ticketing. We have GitHub for code. But for everything else that's unstructured, we really turn to Miro for that. So a huge part of team building and the culture building is around this hub for collaboration and ideation, right? And so you can imagine that when 2 teams come together, they really want to understand what is the common understanding, what are our strengths, and Miro actually is an amazing tool for that. So many of you all are probably familiar with this. Here's an icebreaker. In this case, the team was able to really quickly understand what are each other's superpowers, what are the strengths. So the first part of alignment is around building that foundation of culture. The second problem here is how do you create a space that allows people to share ideas, to debate, to challenge each other? And so this is something that the team worked on together as well, where you were able to actually bring forth ideas, prioritize them, decide what are the things that we have to focus on here, what are the things that are nice to haves, and what will we not do? And this actually, this debate, this challenging, really allows you to build alignment between organizations very, very quickly. And with Miro AI, we're able to actually take those decisions and canonicalize them into a actual piece of context that you can later look back to and say, this is what the outcome was for this discussion. So for us, this is actually super powerful in not only aligning the teams, but taking the context and output of those decisions and actually feeding them into our agentic workflows. So in this case, Miro AI came back, and you have a prioritized list of stack rank priorities. And with any kind of AI-generated response, you can imagine the team will debate and discuss this. But then you have one system of record for that conversation. Now, what's next is that when the teams are starting development, they have their priorities, and they're executing. Your plan that you started with is never the plan that you end with, right? And so the third kind of alignment issue is, as teams are executing, how do you actually stay in alignment as an organization? And with large teams, you actually have cases where teams might be coming on board later on in a project. Or you might have cases where you have distributed teams where not everyone's able to join the meeting, right? And so how do you make sure that you have that traceability for decision making so that not only does everyone know when the decision is made, but later on, when new teams join or more people join, they can actually trace that back to say, what decisions were made, what was the context behind those, and I really want to understand everything that happened before I joined the project, right? And so this is where we're actually using Miro for not just the ideation session, but for things like architecture reviews, for things like UX reviews. And when we have those discussions, the debates, the decisions from those, we can actually use things like Miro MCP to feed those into our agentic workflows downstream. So you can go back and ask Claude Code or Codex, how did we get to this decision? And who was there? And it actually reference this and actually point you to the exact resource and the time where that happened. So that's super, super powerful, particularly as we're using these more agentic workflows in our development process. So the last example that I'll give here is really going back to that Crazy Eights example. So how do you actually challenge your thinking with AI, but also do it in a large group setting so you can actually leverage the power and strength of your team? So the thing that the team did here was what they called a solution boxing match. And I love this idea, where instead of just going and ideating on your own, you're actually bringing your ideas back to your group, and you go in a round robin where each person in your group actually builds on top of your idea. So they're not allowed to take anything away from it, but they can add, they can edit, they can improve it. And in this case, not only are you able to, you can go and evaluate a bunch of ideas with a Crazy Eights type concept, you can actually bring that back to your team, and all of a sudden you have dozens of different ways you can go solve a problem very quickly. So this is a great example of how we're taking the same individual AI capability and broadening it so that a team can leverage it as well. So what were we able to accomplish with this team? So we brought together two teams, different backgrounds, different experience, new strategy, new project. And the team was really able to come together very quickly to have that stronger collaboration, to have that shared context between their tools and systems, and ultimately leads to faster decision making. And so we were able to go from idea to a globally launched product that now powers Cisco's largest customers and their mission-critical networks, something we call global overview. And the teams were able to do this from idea to general availability in less than 3 months. So for us, this is a proof point of pockets of this working where it's not just individuals that are getting velocity from this, but when you kind of instrument the entire operating model, you can actually level up the entire team. So I'll say something that nobody says out loud, which is that most product development teams are spending so much time on the mechanics of building that they're not spending enough time on the decisions that actually matter, right? And so when AI comes in and actually can automate a lot of the mechanics, this is writing tickets, making sure that different folks are aligned on decisions, we can actually spend more time on the decisions that actually move the business forward. So things around product strategy, things around ideation and iteration and prototyping. And really, the time that we spend, we used to spend 20% of our time planning in the past and 80% of our time executing, right? And I think that is very true that we can go and flip that now, where we can spend much more of our time up front on the strategy, on the iterations, on the customer insights, and then 20% of our time executing with AI accelerating that. And really the goal here is not just building more features, but building better products. But in order to do this, we actually have to level up everybody in the organization on a consistent level. right? So some of those capabilities we talked about, how do we actually do this across the organization? And I want to give you 3 examples of some of these systems that we're building for our entire organization that helps level up the baseline for everybody. So the first one here is having a shared customer context repo. So customer context used to be very much tribal knowledge, right? You might have UX researchers that have a lot of knowledge about one particular topic with one particular customer base. You might have PMs that have spent a lot of time in EBCs presenting to a certain class of customers. But to get a uniform understanding across the organization was very hard and still is, right? And so we've built a shared customer context repo at Cisco that aggregates all of our requirements, our strategy docs, our customer insights. And the goal here is that anybody across the team, if you're a designer, if you are an engineer, you can actually go and ask questions and get that customer empathy and really understand the problem that you're solving. So anybody in the organization can go ask, if there's a new problem that you hear, and like, how big is this problem? Is this real? Show me customer quotes where customers are actually feeling this problem. And you can even ask things like, how has this changed over time? Like, is this problem getting worse over time? And it can actually look across our CSAT data and look across time spans, right? So really, really powerful stuff to really democratize customer empathy across the board. The next thing is democratizing prototyping and design. So we all know that organizations are shifting to a case where design can come from anywhere, right? But how many of you have seen some of these prototypes where it just feels like uncanny valley? It's like, that looks almost right, but it's not really there, and we can't ship that, right? And so how do you actually equip the organization to understand not only the design patterns and the best practices, but also what is good design? And ultimately, design can't be in every single decision, every single prototyping session, and how do you actually level the baseline? So a big part of this is actually providing the skills and the tools for the organization, so design systems, building the standardization around the tool set, but also the governance, right? Mature design organizations that work well have design crits and review systems. And so a big part of this operating model is how you scale that for an entire organization. Now the third piece here is how do we level up code understanding? And so code understanding used to be relegated to the realm of your engineers. And for everybody else, it's foreign. And even for the engineering team, it's not uniformly distributed. Right? You might have certain engineers that are experts in one part of the code base and don't know anything about the rest of it. And now with AI, this actually makes things a lot simpler, and actually you can raise the bar for everybody. And so we've been able to actually give code access to all of our PMs and designers. And a huge part of this is not just understanding the code base, but you can ask questions, you can compare notes with feasibility, and it's almost like having a principal engineer at your side 24/7 that doesn't get distracted, doesn't get tired, doesn't get annoyed at your little questions. And this is hugely powerful, particularly as we actually hook this into things like automation. Right? And so someone from my team actually built this demo in one of the showcases that we had recently. And the demo is able to take any bug report, if it's a screen recording in any language, it can actually transcribe that and analyze the issue and then compare that with the code base and actually propose a pull request or a ticket based on that bug report. So this is something that might have taken multiple round trips, maybe days to actually put together, or in reality, something like this actually sits in a backlog for months, right? And this is something that we can actually fully automate with a simple system with these tools that we have today. So really, really incredible things that we can do to level up that collaboration. Now, as we think about our roles as evolving, it's not just how we work as individual functions, it's how we actually collaborate across teams as well. So from a product perspective, a lot of our focus is actually thinking about what should we not build, right? What is our strategy, and what is the game that we're playing? What is the game that we're not playing? And when AI compresses the build cycle, we can actually spend a lot more time on this. And I find that the organization actually needs this focus more, right? So how do we actually communicate strategy and vision across the organization much more cleanly? And this actually takes deeper collaboration with engineering, with design. How do we actually have the vision prototypes? How do we show the North Star? And on the engineering side, how do we make sure we have deeper partnership on feasibility so we know what's possible and what's not? The best product organizations are not the ones that are evaluated on shipping the most, but rather shipping the highest impact products. And this allows us to focus on that. From a design perspective, one thing that I've seen with my teams is that it's easier to build really polished UI. And it's easier to build polished designs, right? And when we look across this across the board, more and more teams are building more UI. And at the end of the day, like, customers are getting inundated with new screens, new features. And the question that we need to be asking ourselves as designers and UXers across the organization is, what is good design here? And actually, what is the minimum amount of UI and product that we need to be building to solve this problem? And that actually flips the problem on its head, right? And the more that I see this, the more that we have to make those alignment decisions, those trade-off decisions in the broader organization. And that requires that deep partnership with product, with engineering, understanding our customer insights, our metrics, and what's feasible and what's easy to build. And from an engineering perspective, there's a saying that you can have something that is high scale, something that is low risk, or something that is cheap to build. But in reality, you can only have 2 of the 3 of those, right? And this judgment of deciding that balance between cost and risk and scale becomes a lot more the focus of engineering teams. And to be able to make those judgment calls, it requires that deep partnership with engineering, with product. Does this need to scale to 1 million users, or is it something that we can go and ship and learn very quickly? So previously, we used to reward engineering teams for having the best estimates, but at the end of the day, all of the estimates are out the window, right? Any AI can go and build something very, very quickly. And what really matters here is what problems are worth solving and what are the approaches to scale that you want to take. So Simon Willison, at the end of the interview, mentioned that throughout his whole career, his superpower had always been prototyping. And the superpower of being able to show an idea very, very quickly, that superpower is now gone, right? Everybody in this room has that ability now. So what really remains is the capability to pressure test your ideas and to prove what's worth solving. So human judgment really is a superpower that remains. So AI didn't take that away from us. It actually made that the only thing that matters, right? So the tools have changed. The operating models have not. So let us let our roles sharpen into those context keepers, into those experience curators, into those trust builders. And let's deepen those partnerships across our functions so we can actually solve better problems, deepen our customer understanding, and make more informed technical trade-offs. So let's use AI to challenge your thinking. Bring that crazy eights mentality to the next design review, the next ideation session. Let's free up all of the mechanics and free up more of our time to focus on those high-level judgments. And ultimately, don't focus on building more features, but focus on building better products. Thank you. Thank you for your time.